Hello. This is Derek from Wonderful Tea and Tao Teaware. Welcome back to another episode of Tea Soup, a podcast all about tea culture, life in modern China, and Chinese tea. I'm your host, Derek Poskin. I've been living in China since 2016, and I've been drinking, buying, and selling Chinese tea for the past decade. So, pop on that kettle, heat up your teaware, and let's get this session started. So, in this episode of Tea Soup, this is Derek from One River Tea, and I'm joined by
Alex from One River Tea.
Amazing. Today in this episode, this is the long-promised episode all about sourcing yellow tea. In this episode, this happened in 2023, and we get all the way out to the Golden Chicken Mountain, to the peak of the Golden Chicken Mountain, which is the origin point of yellow tea in Anhui, in the Huoshan village. And as we're stepping out away from this, let's give a little context onto what is yellow tea. Alex.
So I guess the image many of you might have of yellow tea, much like I have, was it was like a level of oxidization, right? So there was some imagined no oxidization, thorough kill the green, it's green tea, right? It's fresh. And then somewhere beyond green tea, there comes oolong tea, then red tea, and then finally dark tea. This is like a vision I think I saw in like books growing up as a kid, picture books, online, like forums you would search tea in like high school a decade ago. That was my image of yellow tea. I thought it would be yellow soup, and that it distinguished itself as a level of oxidization. What it is really is just it's kind of like a category of tea, a style of production. There's a certain flavor associated with it, we can talk about in a second, which happens when you keep tea, which is not yet dried, but the green has been killed, and it's still moist. So in that moist environment, there are just different compounds, different enzymes, different levels of them, different flavors that come out. When you have a situation where you have hot, moist tea, and it can be really moist or not so moist, and not yet dry. And then something changes where it no longer is green tea, but it's not quite close enough to what we would call oolong tea or red tea, such that, come the 20th century, it gets classified as its own category of tea. Whereas historically, if you look in, books on tea from the 19th century or earlier, no one really has this concept of yellow tea as a separate category of production.
Yeah, you mentioned, turn of the century, it gets classified as its own thing. I remember in that book that we translate often, the 1979 book
right.
about tea, is yellow tea a category in that?
It is not.
And that's, that's not even that ancient, right?
That's
and
right.
So yellow tea seems to be this new classification for a tea that's been around for a while, and we'll talk about other sources that kind of say, like, if your tea is getting yellow, you messed up. Like, if your tea is being fermented, it's probably because you did this. It's probably because this happened during your production phase. And then some places have this, and we saw that actually in Guapian, where they're making the Luan Guapian, they have a Meng phase, right? Where they, after it is kill green rolled, they kind of pile it immediately after it dries.
That's right,
which is like, we thought, this is fascinating because we just saw this happening in the yellow tea. Anyways, my understanding of yellow tea is that it was one of the 6 categories from time immemorial until now, and it had that phase of fermentation. I think you mentioned oxidization, and I think it's important here to kind of split these two up. Oxidization and fermentation are not the same thing, even though in Chinese they're the same word, right? So oxidization is what takes a tea from a green tea into a black tea or into a red tea. Fermentation is something that chemically changes the tea kind of in another direction. And so when I think of yellow tea, I always think of pu'er. I think of the sheng pu'er becoming cooked pu'er. And so I think of this, after it's completely made, it's sitting down, and then they force ferment it. They pile it, they soak it in water, they put a lot of heat into it, and they let it ferment for an unknown amount of time, and they come out with a yellow tea. But I think, like, as we saw, as Alex mentioned, what's actually happening, it's in the green tea process at some phase, either while it's wet or while it's dry, it's piled up, and the excess heat and some of the living chemical compounds, the constituents within it, are chemically altered by this phase of piling, of covering, and etc. So,
Sure, and I guess like why it gets its name is because physically, if you were trying to make green tea and you messed up, it yellows, right? It's like
yep.
what distinguished it was this like uh, divergence in color from green tea, and then certain places when they were making green tea already just found that they liked that, right? And that just became the product. So, I think in the Qing Dynasty and earlier, the places that start to really specialize in yellow tea like Yueyang in Hunan province,
Right.
Mengding in Sichuan, and then also where we were, Huashan in Anhui. That just became kind of like, oh, this is a style of green tea. It's a little extra yellow there, a little sweeter, a little less astringent, and that just became how it, I guess, defined itself as a tribute tea in the larger feudal system. And then that all comes tumbling down. And part of the reason in the book you mentioned where they don't talk about yellow tea except for very, very brief passages, right? It's not in his classification system. There's no list of yellow teas. He mentions, the places that we went to. He mentions Luangguape. He mentions Huashan by name.
Oh,
And he
wow.
mentions there were these tribute teas that were called yellow. But in the 50s onwards, we've gone through the revolution, two revolutions. We've gone through war, two wars. We've gone
Civil
through
wars, right? Like,
yeah, banditry. We've gone through a complete breakdown in the tribute system as it was. And then the entire Chinese tea export market is devastated with the expansive tea cultivation in Sri Lanka and in Assam by British competition. So really, the whatever historically existed that was called yellow tea, with the exception of in Hunan, is totally lost. It's lost in Huashan. It's lost in Sichuan.
this is fascinating. And so you're getting into something that we discovered when we went to Huoshan. It's this lost technology. And why was it lost? It was because, yeah, like you said, like these devastation, wars, famines, a lot of social unrest, a lot of social change, and it's like, okay, like this small tributary in like that tribute tea market, in this really fine web of like, okay, this area is making this tea. It's a luxury good at some point, right? These kinds of really fancy teas. And so that's some of the first stuff that gets cut away back to the necessities of it. So really cool because yeah, that book is coming right out of revolutionary times, 1979, the end of like the Maoist era, right?
That's right. Yep.
So getting back to our personal experiences, we mentioned what we thought yellow tea was. When was the first time you had a yellow tea that you really noticed was a yellow tea?
Sure, it was. So shout out to Dylan from Sweetest Stew. I had heard of yellow tea before, and I had had things labeled yellow tea in the course of my time in China. And I think even in America at some like tea houses, and I hated all of what I had. It just tasted like green tea. And then
Yeah.
like the thing I had in Ensha first that was called a yellow tea was this like really, it was really expensive, really beautiful looking yellow leaf green tea, which I think now probably was
Huangjingya.
Huangjingya, but like, and then I brewed it up and it just tasted like green tea. I thought, oh, this is all fake, right? And even in like the tea culture class I had taken in Ensha by like the government there, they mentioned yellow tea, brew it as a green tea. Like, that was it. It was like one sentence. That was the end of our discussion about
That
what
was,
to
that
do
was
with
like
yellow
a
tea.
university course on tea. Like,
That's right. Set up by the not the university where I teach, but the university across the street had set up this course. And I'm like, okay, so yellow tea not important. Whatever it is, it's not important, right? And then years later, maybe about 2 or so years ago, the year before we went out to Golden Chicken Mountain, I get this sample from Dylan from Sweetest Stew, and yeah, I remember I brewed it up as I was waiting to get on a bus. I put it in our trademark ORT explosive thermos or tumbler. I got on the bus, and I remember I was just sitting there looking out the window. I was down in Hunan. I'm very fond of Hunan, and I forget where I was going or what I was doing, but I just like I remember like sipping on it and being like, "Oh my God, that's different. It's not green tea. It was discernibly sweeter, creamier, smoother, kind of fruity. It was just not green tea. And of course, yes, the leaves were yellow, and the scent on it was so subdued, and it just like I, I guess there's like an association of that taste and smell to that bus.
so
So, so,
what was that the Huangjin, not the Huangjin, yeah, the Huangda cha?
so that was not the Huangda cha. That was, I think we'll call like wet fermentation, but still a much lower level of that, right? Not quite Huangda cha. You know,
Okay.
like, we'll talk about our scale in a second here. Probably around 20%, right?
Yeah, I feel like you sent me some of that. You and Cheyenne sent me some of
I
that.
think I did.
And
Yeah.
then I slept on it, and I didn't drink it for a long time.
Yep.
And then you were just like, "Hey, have you tried that yellow tea?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah, let me try it." And I tried it, and yeah, I had that same experience where like, "Oh, this is something different," because I've had yellowed teas before, where it's like somebody's like, "Oh, this is the yellow tea," and I drink it, it's just green tea. And I've never had like an interesting yellow tea, and so I slept on that sample. And then you finally like encouraged me to try it, and I tried it, and yeah, it was 100% different from all of the other yellow teas I've experienced in the past. It had that, what is it? It's like corn, right?
Corn,
Like
yeah.
sweet
Sure.
corn
Sweet corn.
flavor,
That's right.
and just it smells different. Like you said, subdued. It's really like mellow, sweet. Yeah, it's hard to explain. I wish we had some right now to drink on, but we are in a hotel in Chengdu right now, on the way back from Emershan, on the way back to getting to Hafeng. But anyways, so that was our first experience. Shout out, thank you, Dylan the Sweetest Two, for inspiring this. And
That led to the first yellow pill. Remember the sampler box we did that year? Was it the
oh,
same year or was it the year after?
that was probably the same year. Like when I tried that, then I was like, oh yeah, let's do a
Okay.
sampler
Yeah,
box. And
yeah.
then I think we sourced it through Dylan, right?
That's right. Yep.
Yeah, with his contacts. And then eventually we've kind of gotten away from those contacts, right?
That's right,
Because,
yeah.
is this the guy that was raising the price on you?
That's the very same. So it's just like in the car ride, out here. I was talking. So Manfu, if you want to try their tea, certainly try their tea. Dylan can maybe help you. Sweetest dude, don't cut all this out. Cut all this out. But like, maybe Manfu can. Manfu is a. Is it working still? Oh, yeah. So Manfu is a factory based mostly in Huashan, not Huashan, based mostly in Huangshan in Yellow Mountain. But they also have like a little satellite operation in Luan, and he's very committed to like trying to do yellow tea again. But again, he's very much Yellow Mountain based, and I don't know how much of what goes onto his WeChat moments is true. And this year, I was asking just a couple weeks ago, like, where's the Huang Dacha? I get a response on the way out here to Ameishan, where he's like, oh, well, I sold all that. New stuff still being made, price to be determined. And like, maybe if you really want the old stuff, I can find some for someone, whatever, and then maybe it's going to be a bit more expensive. So, again, it seems like he's mm, not the best contact we could have for that.
Do you have the suspicion that he's not actually making it?
I don't know, because he has, again, someone's making it, and
Yeah.
it's not the people we've seen.
Right.
So I don't know if it's in Golden Chicken or Mountain, if it's in the village, or is it in the Dahuaping Township? Is it even in Luan? But somewhere he is making yellow tea. We had that yellow tea, and it was good.
Okay.
So there is yellow tea to be had through him, and it tastes good.
Honestly, I do like the Huang Da Cha. Like,
You do like
think
the-
I do
yeah,
like
yeah,
it.
sure.
Because I think that was my first experience. That was the one that I had that I was like, wow, this is something unique. And so this kind of prompted the visit to Huoshan.
Yep.
Because we did want the actual connection. We wanted the source, we wanted to see it being made. We wanted to see where it really truly comes from. And yeah, so that prompted a trip. Where is Huoshan?
So if you were to go from the coast, let's say the coast of China, and you go up the Yangtze River, right? You first pass through Nantong, pass through Yangzhou, you pass through Nanjing, you pass through Bengbu in northern Anhui, and if you were to keep going all the way through Anhui province, you eventually come to the Dabie Mountains that separate Anhui's northern, like Huayang Plain, which Yangzhou is a part of, and then the Jianghan Plain, which includes Jingzhou and Wuhan. So right between there, the Dabie Mountains, and they were a site of banditry for a long time, a lawless kind of place that I forget the exact statistic. Was it 53 or 56 generals?
Yeah,
right?
53 or 56 generals.
Yeah, of the Red Army came from there. So it was definitely a rebellious place. I think also the Anhui warlord clique 20 years before them, right? So it was definitely a rebellious place and
Also,
lawless place.
that's an interesting point of power too. Like located right on the Yangtze, between two massive plains and the mountains. Like, and this is also near Lu'an, right?
Yeah, so Luan City, so every Chinese person it's kind of a weird thing where like if you look at it, it's written Liu, right? It's written six,
Six, yeah.
six on, right? And then every person will say, it's pronounced Luan. when you go there, all the locals still say Liuan. 6 on. So so Luan is the correct textbook definition, and maybe was what it was called like in official documents, or how it was the official pronunciation, the proper pronunciation, the proper French, proper Greek, whatever you want to call it. But like the common people there still call it Lyon, so you can call it as you like. And yeah, I mean, I remember when we first got there, it was not a very impressive looking city. It was definitely, it looked like the plains still, right? You didn't really see the mountains when you got to the city. It's a place I remember I used to do lots of vaping, like, because if you're coming from Yangzhou to Enshi, right? Luan Station's 4 minutes.
Oh,
One of those longer
well,
stations
long
where you can
stop.
get up onto the platform.
Get out, smoke a cigarette.
Exactly right, and get back onto the train. So I remember like stopping, and then it was also in Luan where Xiaoyan got stuck. I remember she was going back to Nanjing to graduate for her college there, and it was right during the beginning of COVID.
Oh.
And there was those cases from Luan, right?
Oh.
And then she was at the Luan train station about to transfer, and they're like, no one's getting on any trains. So she was stuck there and forced to survive off only like the Luan Guapian samples in the train station and KFC for like a whole day. Just stuck there. So that was our first encounter with Guapian as the ORT
that's rough.
community.
Yeah.
So besides my vaping on the platform and Cheyenne being trapped in the station with KFC
Well,
and
let me put
Guapian.
in my 2 cents.
Sure.
I knew a girl whose ancestral home was Luan. And
Okay.
She was always like, come to my hometown. I can show you how to make tea and stuff like that. I was like, that sounds cool.
We did not follow up with her when we were out there.
We did not. No.
Okay. A particular reason for that?
Moving on.
Oh, okay. So yeah, Luan was definitely like not the most exciting place. When we first got there, we get to the tea market. And do you remember our initial experience at the tea market?
This is the Luan tea market.
That's right. Our first day there, we put our bags down, we go right there.
I thought it was pretty cool. I mean, it's like you can't throw a rock without hitting a tea house. They're all making that Luan Guapian, and I was surprised about how much wholly handmade Luan Guapian we were seeing, because it's very kind of clear. I guess actually in the factory in Amershan, we just saw the machine-made
we saw
Guapian with like brooms.
The modern version of that.
It's ridiculous. It seems like some mad scientist's invention, where it has this like mechanical claw and like an old wok, and attached to the claw is this like straw broom, and then you flip on this machine and it just rotates this broom in this wok like a hand would. Anyways, guapian should be made in a wok with a straw broom, and when you're doing that, it creates a very natural shape to the leaf. The other way to make the guapian is to put it in that tiaoji, 什么 hu tiaoji?
Li Tiaoji?
Li tiaoji. Li tiaoji. You put it in that, and it creates a really stripped shape. And so it's very clear which ones were machine made and which ones were handmade, ostensibly. And so when I got to Luan, I was like, wow, there's a whole lot of handmade stuff going on.
That's
was my
right.
experience.
So yeah, so on the one hand, I guess the Guapian stuff was all really cool. Like walking into the Bat Cave. Oh, what was that family's name? The Bat Cave folks?
Wong's, right?
Well, I think it was Wong's, walking in there. And then I was like, oh, here, check out. He pulls out a handful of like the green tea. And I see all the blisters on it, right? From it kind of got burned.
Yeah.
And my first response was like, oh, this is terrible. Let's get out of here. And he's like, no, wait. I know. I know what you're thinking. Stop. I'm sure he's like given the spiel 1,000 times.
Yeah.
Actually, this is how you know it's really handmade. This is the good stuff.
Blisters, yeah.
And even with that, you remember when we first saw those blisters years ago? Years ago, it was in Puppy Burner. What the heck?
Dragon Mountain.
Dragon Mountain. Yeah, Dragon Mountain in Chuzhou. And I remember like seeing this. I was like, oh, is this some kind of blight? Like, why are they all blistered?
Yeah.
Trying to figure out like why would they be blistered like this? What is
We thought it was
causing
a
them to
blight on the
pop?
leaves, yeah.
Something wrong with the leaf, but no, it's just something wrong with the
process.
production. But in this case, it's something inevitable. Because if you're doing it with the whisk, you can't guarantee all the leaves are going to stay off the hot metal long enough to prevent that. And ultimately, it's part of the product, and it's okay. So it's like that was definitely a learning experience. Seeing, because we had never seen. First of all, I don't think you'd seen the broom method
No, that
before
was
on
the
a
first
walk
time seeing the broom, yeah.
anywhere in this country, and I certainly hadn't ever seen a green tea market where they were like re-roasting green tea right outside, like in the city. That was crazy.
And the machinery for re-roasting the tea was awesome, right? They had like the charcoal basin at the bottom, this like series of like a trolley that would go over the charcoal basin. It would have like a big bamboo basket with tea, and they would pile the tea on it, and then pile the tea off it, and then move it off of the charcoal basin. and that's a mechanized version of the traditional way where you would, and I saw like I saw this done on other people's YouTube channels, or not YouTube channels, but WeChat moments, where they're taking the tea in a big basket and then putting it over the charcoal basin and
Oh,
then
that's
taking
right.
it
And then
off.
running back and forth. Yeah, I think they mentioned that.
Yep.
The traditional way of
But
doing it.
anyways, that's not necessarily what we're talking about. But
Sure, but that
in
that
that
was
market, yeah,
that was really satisfying. I also remember getting there and being initially shocked by the lack of yellow tea, right?
yeah,
And like, where's the
exactly.
yellow tea? Huh? People,
Zero yellow
even
tea.
Wong was like, people still make yellow tea. He, for him, it was he was surprised to know that it was something you could get at all. He had to call his friend in Huoshan. You guys got any yellow tea? No. Yeah, I didn't think so. So it was like, for someone so embedded in the industry, right there, at that big tea market in Luan, to not know where the yellow tea. For me, it seemed like a sign. Oh shoot, we're not gonna find any yellow tea,
Yeah,
right?
I thought we were in the wrong place.
Yeah,
I was
sure.
like, because Lu'an and Huoshan are very close together, right?
That's
There's
right.
like,
Yeah, Huoshan's a part of the prefecture of Luan, I guess.
right, and so like, if tea is being made, yellow tea is being made in Huoshan, they would know about it here in this wholesale market. However, didn't we find some yellow tea in that market?
We did, but you can definitely tell its place in that market. It was,
Yeah.
in some dusty metal bin that not even refrigerated, by the way. It was just sitting in the back of the storage on some bottom shelf. First, he gave us the not so real yellow tea, right?
Yeah.
He gave us the Huangjing Ya, or like it was just like the Huachan Huangya cultivar, right? It was a local cultivar, but it was just a green tea. It was just totally a green tea. And after that, he was trying to, like, scratching his head, like, what do they want, right? I've given them what people usually want when they say this word, right? Because if you walk around the tea market, you'll see people have Huoshan Huangya, the Huoshan yellow bud, right?
Yep.
But if you walk in there, give me a Huangja. Do you have any green yellow tea? No. What? What is that? So like, it was disheartening at first, but then finally, in this like dusty tin, he pulls out some real yellow tea, and we sip it, and both of us were like, "Oh,
Completely different. Yeah.
yep,
This is
totally
the yellow
different.
taste. Yeah.
Yeah, that's yellow tea. I'm like, incredible." And I remember asking him, "Is it this year's?" And he smiles. I was like, "Is it last year's?" And I was like, "Is it 5 years old?" And he's like, "Ah, oh, Yonamala." Like, yeah, it's that old. And I wonder if I had said 7 years, would he said yeah?
Yeah,
Because
that's
like,
a good question. Yeah. And so, one interesting thing here is like what we mentioned at the early part of this episode is like there are two ways to make yellow tea. One is intentionally to make yellow tea, and the other one is accidentally. Like I feel like this might have been something that got yellowed, and then just had that off taste that he's just like, yeah, I'm not sure if I can really sell it, and it's just been sticking around.
could be, yeah.
But again, like we bought it, and then he insisted on re-roasting it for us.
Yep. Yeah. So I don't think he thought it was a good tea.
Yeah.
I don't think he liked it.
Yep.
Um,
But we bought a lot of what he had, almost all of it.
that's right. Yeah.
And then, but it still didn't satisfy us because he's not the one that was making it. He didn't know the technology. He didn't have any more of it. And
Yep.
so it still wasn't ideal. And so we decided to, okay, like we can't find yellow tea in Luan. Let's go closer to the source. Let's go to Huoshan.
Took that 45-minute bus ride over to Huashan County. And this is all the same day, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it looks like in the early part of the day we get there, and then by the by the late afternoon we get to Huashan County, put our stuff down in the hotel. I think we only actually get to the market with basically at dusk that evening. So maybe it's 6, 7 at night. It's May, right? And we are walking around, and I think of the 4 places we went in, initially none of them had yellow tea.
And this was the biggest blow for me, where I'm like, here we are in Huoshan. This is the home of yellow tea in the region. And we go and ask for yellow tea, and they're like, yeah, we have yellow tea. We're like, great. We sit down. They open it up. It's the Huangjinya cultivar. It is not made in a yellow process. It's just a tea that looks yellow.
Yep.
It's like every time it just crushed me. And I'm like, I don't think we're going to find it. Like,
That's absolutely right. Yeah, I remember. And then the one, we did get that one lead. So we already had the lead for the later hero for Huifeng for Li. The guy's like, oh, you want yellow tea? Go talk to that Laoban over there. They help that boss across the way, right? We walk over there, and he's not there,
he's
right?
not there. He's up on the mountain.
Up on the mountain,
Making yellow tea.
And then he'll call us. He'll call us later, right?
Yep.
So then so be it. We're walking out. As we're walking out, we'd already attracted some attention because there were a bunch of foreigners walking around, right? And it was only maybe 3 or 4 months after the end of COVID, really, right? After the end of like the true end of all the restrictions, which have been the beginning of 2023. So not a lot of foreigners moving around China. Maybe not a lot of foreigners going to that tea market. And as we're approaching the gate, this plump, smiley guy, bald guy, um, Lao Rao is like, what are you guys up to? What are you guys doing? You want yellow tea? I know all about yellow tea. And he's just really, really
He's
excited.
super excited, super charismatic. You can't help but like this guy.
And I have a sample of yellow tea. And he's like, that's no yellow tea. So I'm trying to like show him like a picture of I had seen from like Monfu's like WeChat before, and like,
yeah.
look, this person's making yellow tea. He's like, "Oh, I don't think that's how you're really making it. Like, get in here, right? He pulls us into the shop, and we sit down.
And he's all smiles. He's
Yeah, he's-
really excited.
He was really excited, and then he opens up another tin, not dusty this time, front and center in the store, and he's like, smell that.
Smell it.
Smell that.
Get in there.
Do you smell that? Do you smell that? Taro. That's how you know it's yellow tea. But it's not really yellow tea. Actually, it's just my good for the market. He would call it in his own words 20% oxidization. That's
Yeah.
the number he affixed to it.
Which we scientifically called 15%.
Yeah, and
Why is that?
well, you some of you already know what is 100% oxidized slash what is 100% ferment? What does it look like? How do you put a percentage on it? Like
It's red tea, right? Yeah.
theoretically, and I have seen some scales here where people have tried to do this and be like, okay, so what compounds at what level of degradation and what parts per million, whatever, would you call 100% oxidized or 100% fermented? But like, these are ongoing process. I think something could ferment potentially until whatever it is that's being eaten, whatever it is that's being changed is exhausted, right? Whatever that fuel material is gone, it's still happening. Same goes for oxidization. Something's breaking down, it's oxidizing. So any carbon thing I think is going to do that. Not even carbon, any like tea or even any food which is on its way to becoming soil.
So you think 100% oxidized would be soil?
Soil, it would be soil, right? Yeah, would it not? And like, yeah, and they're chemical. So like I've seen some of this, like the attempts at making a scale out there. I think there was some like fancy pants student in Zhejiang who was trying to do that. But really, we aren't basing it on his scale or anyone's scale. This is just a rough number the producers themselves throw around to give you an idea of a ballpark. Where is it? Like, how close is it to green tea on the one extreme? Or hopefully, after you've made the green tea, it's done. That's it. It's basically nice, fresh, green, it's much more less of a scientific or chemical thing than it is trying to, in your mind, say, okay, how close is this to green tea? How far away from green tea
Right.
is this? Probably is the best way to think about it. And, I think let's talk about the scale a bit more for a second. The ones that were closest to that probably would be Lao Rao's.
15%.
15% we ended up calling it, because it was even greener than the stuff we had from that tea market.
20% stuff.
Yeah, what became our, again, that guy, he didn't give us a number, right? Yeah, he had no idea what it was.
And I think Lao Rao, his number was Ban Fa Chao. It's half fermented.
Yeah. And I think we only extracted 20% the next day. I think we had to go back, right? And I was like, what is this? give me something. So I think he only gave a number when asked to give a number. Yeah, Ban Fa Chao was the language
But
he was
at the
using.
same time, that 15% oxidization stuff, that's what's most commonly found on the market as yellow tea.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
That is truly yellow tea, not just that yellow cultivar. You'll usually only see stuff that's this minimally fermented stuff that has like just enough difference from green tea to be noticeable, but still not true yellow tea.
And maybe we should talk for a second, like why that is the case.
Yeah, the market, yeah.
Sure, and that university course where it's like, it's green tea, treat it like green tea. So you want to make something which is close to green tea, but still critically not quite green tea. All right, so most people, they're just fine with green tea.
Yeah.
But a certain number of like snobbish people, they want something different, right? Great. So for that small minority of tea enjoyers, you just add this one step. Dry fermentation means you've gone through all the stages of making green tea. You've withered it, you've put it through the kiln green machine, you've spun it around, you've smushed it through kneading, and it's gone through the bake, it's gone through the kiln once, and you take it out, and before you do that second or third bank, you pile it. You put it on a tarp or just directly on the concrete in a big old pile, and you let it sit there, maybe for a few hours. And Laura, I think it was for 10 hours you left it there, so half of a day. And then you stick it back in, you finish it like any other green tea. So there's no extra labor. You just let it pile, right? You aren't, as they did traditionally, putting it into these cloth bags, right? And having to check on every couple hours. It's not the wet fermentation style of, oh, we're going to yellow it 3 times, dry it 3 times. It's much less labor. It's just making green tea and waiting, basically.
And it's also safer.
Sure.
Like if you're doing dry fermentation, you're really not going to mess it up too badly.
Yep, yeah.
Like it'll have a weird flavor, but it's still within limits. Wet fermentation, if you're doing this before it's actually dry, like you have a big risk involved here, which is why, we'll get up to Mr. Lee here in a second. But at the same time, like, yeah, there's a lot of mythology behind what is, marketable yellow tea, what is true yellow tea, what is historical yellow tea, ancient yellow tea, and then getting into the different percentages, that 15%, which is good for the market, 20% that's a little more odd, and then eventually getting to this 50%, which there is just, as he says, like no domestic market for it.
Sure.
Yeah, and so you ask why is 15% yellow tea the most common? It's because it's a green tea market. They're selling yellow tea to green tea people. And so it's like they don't want a huge difference to it. There's no existing yellow tea market really domestically. Yeah.
Yep.
And yeah, so entering Lao Rao, super excited, small, jolly, fat guy, or portly guy, sorry. And he's telling us all these stories about I used to be mayor here, right? Like
takes out picture. Yeah,
takes out a picture. Yeah.
he was the mayor of Golden Chicken Mountain in the
of all
1980s.
Places, yeah.
So
in the 1980s, exactly what we're looking for.
yeah, so exactly when this method was reintroduced, or rather, I mean, as he says it very clearly, he made it up, right? So like not Lao Rao. So there was an agronomist sent from the Anhui Agricultural University. So back in Hefei, the government is looking at tea production in the province, and they know that out in Huashan County, all they can basically make is like fake guapian, right? But there is this market recognition of the name had survived of
Golden
Huashan
Chicken.
Yellow Bud, right? And people were still calling the green tea they made there Huashan Yellow Bud. So there was an interest by Anhui's like commercial bureau, whatever. This is classic like late 80s China, right?
Yeah.
The government's like, okay, we need to figure out how to make this tea, right, for our bustling expanding market. And they send out this tea guy, this agronomist, and you look for some old people who potentially know how to make this old style of Huashan Bud properly in the bags, right? So he was looking for the bag. He knew from past documents it was a bagged yellow tea similar to the ones that had survived in Yueyang, and there was more documentation of in Mengding over in Sichuan. So he knew what he was looking for, and he couldn't find it.
So this is lost technology after the that century of war.
He's basically a century too late, right?
Yeah, and so he's looking for that old methodology to recreate it, and he can't find it.
Yep. So through some inference and some trips to Hunan, he basically makes his best approximation using those local buds and working with the village leader Rao. And then it was still a collective tea factory at the time until '96. So
Yeah,
from
the 80s.
from the '80s, from the late '85, '86, when he gets out there for the next 10 years, it's through the collective factory. And then finally, '96, collective factory is kaput. And there's a good reason it's kaput. One part, it was the usual structural reform of the '90s, right? But it did not become a successful private company selling yellow tea because for the exact reasons they're talking about, it's a yellow tea market, right?
There's no market.
People didn't want yellow tea, and people like Lao Rao who were still in the tea business, and he's, by the way, still in the tea business, became a green tea vendor, right?
Yeah.
He moved down to the county seat, and he sells green tea, and that's what he makes, as does everyone else around him in that little enclave. But the impression of green tea really seems to have struck him and his wife. They were both really excited to talk about yellow tea, to talk about the yellow buds, and they had a very clear idea in their head of what it should be. This agronomist figured it out, and that's what this historical method should look like. And yeah, and for him, it's just can't be done. It's expensive.
Yeah. So they had essentially government funding, an external expert come in, try and recreate it, had a factory and everything. And so for a little period of time, they're making an approximation of yellow tea. And then 1996, the factory goes under, and yellow tea just dissolves. And so this very, very short revitalization of yellow tea that just doesn't stick, doesn't work, and fades back into obscurity. Right? I impressed some Greeks with my Greek recently. I talked about, they were like, oh, do you know any Greek? And I was like, oh, let me tell you about the Greek word for truth, aletheia. And they're like, aletheia? And I'm like, yes, it means away from the unknown. Like the lethe is the river of unknown, and is away. And so to find truth, what you're doing is you're looking into obscurity, and you're taking something out of obscurity, pulling it out of the water, right? And then just dropping it back in. Like yellow tea is into the river of Lethe.
Okay, sure,
They find
sure.
the yellow tea technology, they take it out of the river of Lethe and see its face, and then they just drop it back into the river of the unknown.
Wrong one. Nope, sorry, wrong lever.
So, yep. And so that's really cool how short-lived it is. Lao Rao's super excited about his photo. What was this thing about his friend who was making? He talked about the Ban Fa Jiao and then talked about the Ban Chu Jia. The Ban Chu Jia is the half monk.
Half monk,
What's
yeah.
a half monk?
So Chuja, right? You leave your house, leave your family, or you're gonna go like go into monastic life basically. And so there was the half monk who became Rao's friend. I'm sure for the same reason we became Rao's friend. He wants to get to yellow tea, and he was living in Hefei, and he comes out. I think he's just kind of like probably like one of these like rich, kind of into like the spiritual, traditional kind of Chinese guys. And I'm sure he wasn't, he definitely probably didn't give up all of his household wealth, but he, at the very least, interested in tea culture. And he comes out and he makes some, and he pays Rao to make, to help him make this tea every year. And he made, I think, just half a gin that year. And he took it all with him back to Hefei.
And this was the more yellowed tea than Rao was selling.
That's right. This is like purely as like an artifact, right? As a recreation of what Rao was doing back in the 80s and 90s. This guy
And it
wanted to
tasted
be
good, right?
tasted good,
Didn't have
yeah.
enough to sell though.
Yep, yeah. So that was Rao, and that was like his vision for okay, you do dry let's call it dry yellowing to sell, and then you could do wet yellowing as an appreciation, right, of this historical method. But it's not something which is really practical. And what a shame that was for him, right? He was like bummed out about it, and he was like waxing on and on. When I brought him that sample of the stuff from from the Luan, I was like, oh, isn't this great, right? And he's like, no, for him it was terrible, right? It was nothing close to how it used to be, right? How it truly was, like Anyway, so like for him, yeah, I'm sure all these things are bound up in commercial interest and
Right.
personal pride and
Yeah.
beyond just the aesthetic appreciation of what the tea was. Yeah.
So after Lao Rao, we're still not satisfied.
Yep.
Right? We still don't have, Lao Rao's not making the tea we want. The tea we want is made by this half monk that only makes half a gin every year.
And he's gone.
And he's gone. And then, the other stuff doesn't have any stock. And so the only existing hope we have is this guy who supposedly makes yellow tea who's not around. And so how do we get in contact?
Ring, ring. He calls us.
He calls us.
He calls us. He's like, "Where are you? Are you here? Are you in the township?" It's like, no. We're down. We're down in the.
He's asking if we're in the
Dahua Ping, right? So he's
Ping.
asking, "Are we here?" No, we're not here. Okay, come tomorrow. Great. He sends a location, right? I'm like, "Can you pick us up?" He's like, "No." All right, cool. So then I asked
right.
Rao, right?
Okay.
Rao was like, "No worries. I have to go up anyways to the mountain the next day. You guys just come back." Yeah, your confusion, you're puzzling, and you're puzzled. And that's correct because he says, "Come back here at 8 in the morning. I'll just take you guys up the mountain. No problem." 7 a.m. comes. I ask him like, "When are we going?" This is the next morning, right? We're excited to go up there, and then Rao's like, "He's not here yet." 10 minutes go by. He's like, "All right, he's not coming. You guys have to get the mountain on your own." So Rao kind of flaked out on us.
Yeah.
And we ended
That's
up.
my confusion.
Yeah, we ended up booking a car, right?
Yeah.
And as we're going up in this car, this guy in an SUV, he knows about yellow tea, right? Although he's drinking green tea.
Yeah.
And he's just like, "Oh yeah, yellow tea. I know all about it, right? They make it in some incorrect location. I forget if he said like Taiping or Taiyang. I think it was Sun. I think it was Sun or he named some village which is like well over the county line. Maybe they do make yellow tea there, but like well south over the county line. It's not the correct location because we should mention here briefly where we were going in his car up the mountain. That was what the government since 2017 has really stepped up again to say, okay, this is where we're going to do yellow tea. We can talk about the beautiful the production site they've created up top Golden
Oh,
Chicken
yeah.
Mountain, but they've really like, hey, this is like going to be part of like the name card of our county is we make yellow tea, and we're going to really invest heavily to make this project up there work. It's going to be collectively oriented like it was back in the 80s and 90s, and it's going to be organic, and it's going to be traditional, right? So all the buzzwords were hit there. Anyway, so we're getting up the mountain in the guy's car.
I remember this road being particularly twisty turvy, twisty turny. It wasn't so bad. Like the road was totally paved, but it was like so many hairpin turns. It reminded me of the time Xiaoyan got sick going up to Shanmiao. You weren't there for that, but she puked in the car. It was pretty
Yeah,
awesome.
it was pretty bad when I went to
Shanmiao.
Shanmiao, yeah, in
Yeah.
Baojing County.
Oh my god, they have the highway now, right?
Yeah, so maybe it's totally different now. No,
Yeah,
probably
maybe
no
so.
more cable ferry. You have to pull across,
Oh,
right?
you went on the cable ferry?
I went from the other direction. Went from Hubei, right?
I wanted to do that so bad. So there's an actual cable ferry. Like people are pulling the cable to get the boat.
Yeah, so all the
across.
cars go out. I mean, everyone gets out of their cars and they pull the boat across the river. It was kind of fun.
I remember those photos. I was like, Alex, take a better photo, and you guys were just taking phone photos.
Yeah, I bet you that experience is now gone forever.
Oh, your new phone, new flip phone's gone.
Well,
Are
yeah,
you BlackBerry?
yeah. I was my BlackBerry. Yeah, I was my BlackBerry.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
This
so
is not sponsored by BlackBerry.
filmed on
Awesome
BlackBerry.
phone, huh?
Yeah, sick phone. But anyways,
So yeah, that road was pretty wild. But
going up
it
the
was okay.
road. But the guy, I remember, was talking about yellow tea. It's like, what is your impressions of it? Like a local person who'd heard of it, right? And he was just like, yellow tea, that's just for something to look at. So it's something to give to someone as a gift, right?
yeah.
People need to
It's a
drink green tea.
gift,
A person needs to drink green tea. A person needs to tea shed. A person needs to wake up, right? You need to stay alert.
Yeah.
So that's why green tea is useful. Yellow tea is not useful. It's just to drink, right? It's something fun to have and play around with. But that's not for a real man doesn't need that, right? So anyways, like despite his discouraging remarks, we get up to the mountain, to the factory. This is not quite up to Golden Chicken. This is just getting to the factory itself. He drops us off there. Driver gets out with us, and we all go peek our heads in, look at the factory, and look at the curiosity that was yellow tea production in the flesh. And what was maybe your first impressions of that factory?
Yeah, that was pretty cool getting right up to the factory immediately. My first impressions was it was very early.
Yeah, it was.
We got up there like 8:30 or something like that. I don't know, maybe 9. But anyways, I thought the factory was pretty nice, very clean, very, very quiet. That was my first impression is like, is there really still tea going on? Because what we found out is this is after all of the main production. What day was this? This was late April, like April 24th, April 25th.
Something like yeah, late, yeah.
And so all of the tea was gone. Right now we just went to Emershan. It's April 15th, and they're like, oh, we're picking summer tea. April
Yeah.
15th is summer tea. And so you can imagine, like, what are you picking on April 25th if April 15th is summer tea? Anyways, we find out kind of his passion project that he's doing after all the good tea has been made. Like, after all, like, the usable green tea is done, now he's making the yellow tea, and my first impression is like nothing's going on. It's just, I see this trough with a cover over it.
Yep, and I think I had the same feeling of like, oh, it's not here. There's nothing here. We've been bamboozled yet again. We're not going to see yellow tea being made. 'Cause it's part of our experiences. We always want to go see the tea being made, right? Want to see it being picked. Want to see how does it become leaf and then eventually get to your cup, right? And if we can't see that critical in between, but luckily the tarp was lifted, right? It was kind of wasn't quite a
Aletheia.
tarp. What was
It
it?
was sorry.
What was that? Wasn't paper? What did he have on top of that? It wasn't plastic. It was kind of some sort of cloth fiber.
Yeah,
Tarp.
Yeah, anyways.
Yeah. I don't remember what it was. He pulls it up, and then inside, lo and behold, tea is yellowing. We got to see actual tea actually yellowing, and indeed, it was late season. It was to be basically Huang Da Cha, right?
Yeah.
But
Well, one funny thing about seeing the yellowing process and, like, our kind of like, oh, nothing's happening. We found out he explains to us the whole processing for his yellow tea. That's the San Mong San Hong, 对吧?
yes, preceded critically by third heat, right?
With third heat. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, the
He walks us through the process, and it's essentially, yeah, you make green tea with that third heat technology, the microwave technology. His kill green machine has lasers that also kill the green, I guess.
Yeah, so this needs to be investigated further. But
Because
there's some.
we saw this in Emershan too. Like,
Yeah, yesterday when we were like doing this like video walking to the factory, the guy's like, "Yeah, this is like Guangbo." I was like, "What? Wait, what? Like
Guang-
optical heat, optical laser? Like, how is this? What?" It blew my mind. So, something's going on. There's some sort of.
there's also a secret for the 108 cultivar, Yaling Ba cultivar in Dragonwell. It was supposedly number 43, Dragon Ball 43, comes from the Chun Tijong. So they isolated a bunch of different plants from the Chun Tijong varietal. This has different shape, this has different, and they compare them all. Number 43 was the one they picked to clone and plant in rows. Then somebody did some experiments with 43 by shooting lasers at it, genetically altering it.
What?
And you get 108, cultivar 108.
Is that really the story?
That's the story.
It's like the Hulk of tea. You just like
I'm like we have to investigate this.
it's like Spider-Man tea. It's just
because
like
I'm looking at all the research, and it's just like, oh yeah, through like X gamma ray mutation, forced gamma ray mutation in this tea
What?
plant,
Okay,
we get this
that-
new cultivar. And so there's something going on with like lasers.
yeah,
and tea.
not CRISPR-19, just lasers.
Yeah.
That seems
Any-
like the interesting. Yeah,
So, anyways, that's secondary, and so he talks about his methodology, and as I was mentioning, like not a lot goes on with yellow tea because you put it in that trough for like 24 hours, right?
a whole week
A
basically.
whole week,
and
it just sits there.
and then well, I guess in your defense, 24 hours it sits there, then it goes and it gets baked, then it goes and sits there again for 24-ish
Yeah.
hours, right?
So it
Back and
gets
forth.
baked between these. So the
That's right.
covering, the sitting, hot tea sitting in the trough. That's the mung, and mung means like it's usually not a good thing, right?
Yeah, so like Munla is like something I would hear. I remember when we were in Etshangmiao, like after the cable ferry up in the factory, and there were some other tea bosses who were out there, and they were buying some tea. And I think they were from Changsha, and they were having fun. They're making some tea in the walks there with some of the masters. And the master looks over and says, "Ah, you've ruined it. Mengla, Huangla. You've already munned it, right?"
Yep. And so I saw that in Dragonwell 2 in Hangzhou, where it's like if you're brewing the tea with the lid on in a gaiwan, they're like, oh, don't mung the cha. Like what you want to do is that's why the dabe cha, the grandpa style, is better because the tea isn't being munged.
Got it.
And so usually it means to cover, it means to like trap in your own heat. Like imagine being hot and sitting under a blanket, right? You're munging yourself.
Yeah, that's a good way of thinking about it. And yeah, exactly under the blanket.
Yeah.
Maybe blanket's the right word for it. A cloth tarp, a blanket.
A blanket.
Yeah, and under that blanket, it was going, and then we got back down to the tea house, and yeah, we had a great diversity of yellow tea there. And I want to mention when we first got in there were some like portly individuals from Xiaoyan's hometown, from Linfen, from Shanxi, and they were like, we need Huang Da Cha, right? And they're looking for like the super cheap price point, and like the Li, the boss, the guy who runs Huifeng Yellow Tea, this factory. It was kind of like, well, I have this and that's it. And then they kind of looked at it for a while, and then ha ha ha. Okay, well, I'll see you later. We'll stay in touch, and then drove off unsatisfied. And then he pulls us aside and is like, well, I'm done with Huang Da Cha. I want to do this anymore. I can't make any money off this, right? The people who drink it up north in China, they really push the price down so low that there's no way you can make money off of it. So he was feeling frustrated with Huang Da Cha, and he really wants to make yellow tea, which is a higher quality, somewhat faithful to tradition.
Because yeah, like his yellow tea was totally 100% different from Lao Rao's.
Yep.
Or maybe
yep.
not 100%, maybe 30% different. Sorry.
How would you describe how did this 30% difference,
And so where Lao Rao's was still green, a little yellow, and kind of straight as needles, Mr. Lee's stuff, it looked almost like a red tea. Like when you look at it, it looks like a curly red tea. It looks black, and then you brew it up, and the wet leaves are yellow. Where, Lao Rao stuff, it looks yellow, it looks green and yellow in the dry form. Mr. Lee's 50%, as we came to call it, looks actually like curly black tea, but then you brew it up and it is yellow. Yeah. And Mr. Lee, he was doing a few weird things. He has this weird idea where it's like, does yellow tea age? And that's a question we posed on Instagram. We're kind of following too, because he had some stuff. Was it 2022 or 2021?
Hey, mid 21. Yeah.
2021. He had some stuff that was loose and some stuff that was pressed into coins. And this is his 50% fermented yellow tea stuff. And we're tasting them. We're like, I'm not sure if these are any good. He brings out the 2023 stuff eventually.
That's
Did-
right.
did
So
he?
not the 2023, that wasn't quite done, right? The stuff he
Yeah,
was
yeah,
making
that's right.
was the not quite Huang Da Cha, but kind of like, a little long in the tooth, late season
Late season
yellow tea, which we ended up selling later and sold quite well.
Which we liked, yeah.
We liked
That
that.
was my favorite,
That-
my favorite version of it. I did not like the 2021 stuff so much, because I feel like his making ability has gotten better.
It was astringent, right? So like part of the stuff, if you look at like the practical guides now in China, in like the literature in China, how to make yellow, how not to make yellow tea, and they say, oh, it's going to get sour, it's going to get astringent. And I really felt that astringency in the 2021 stuff,
Yeah.
where you didn't really in the 2023.
2023 was fantastic, yeah. And as far as it aging, I'm a big proponent that yellow tea will not age the way he wants it to, because with that third type of heat, you're actually killing the green completely, right? You're deactivating the enzyme responsible for oxidization. You are fixing it in a certain state. This is more close to green tea. This is more close to oolong tea. This is more close to yellow tea. Where the white tea and the pu'er, you have a partial fermentation or partial kill green phase that doesn't totally deactivate that enzyme that will allow stuff to oxidize if you have heat, if you have moisture, if you have all of that time. It will change. If you look at an aged oolong, it doesn't age the same way as a white tea or as a pu'er tea. It ages in a different trajectory. And I feel like that's what you'll get with yellow tea. You'll get more closer to an oolong type of aging, which is a mellow aging, which is that dry aging.
I think you're right, because they always talk about, oh, the tea's not ready yet, it's not mellow enough, right?
Mellow, yeah.
Yeah.
So you get this
Makes sense.
eventual mellowing. So yeah, sorry, Mr. Lee, but I think you're. And he also kept it in a refrigerator, yeah, in a
That's right, yeah.
or a cold room,
Um,
which we thought was interesting. If you're trying to age it and then you're refrigerating it, it's kind of counterintuitive.
all I know is the depths of my ignorance, because now I'm thinking about, like, with dark tea, right? It gets mellower. They're waiting for it to mellow out.
Yeah. With red tea also, the red tea doesn't have an kill green phase. Did you know that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting. Like, I didn't realize that until like I actually saw the whole process and was like, okay, like, when are you guys gonna kill the green? Like, you don't have to. We want it completely oxidized. We want it soil.
Fascinating. Yeah. So stay tuned. We're only a decade into tea, or we're going to figure out eventually what's going on. But to be perfectly clear, the people here, the actual producers, the boss of this factory, and the guy who helped him cake his tea down in Fuding, question mark for them as well. They don't know, right? It was an open-ended question. So and then part of the question was like, is it going to age? First of all, that we're gonna interrogate, right? But for him,
Yeah.
he wanted to know, is it going to age better? So first of all, we're assuming it's going to age in the same way a white tea would, which apparently the white tea friend boss of his in Fuding thought was plausible enough. They caked it together, and they both keep some at the factory in Fuding and the factory there in Huashan, and they're both selling it, and they're both letting it, mature, whatever that means, and they have different opinions. I think the boss in Huashan thought it would be better if it was loose, and then the boss in Fuding thought it would be better if it was caked, and
Which is
yeah.
interesting because caking it creates, an area of anaerobic fermentation.
Wouldn't it be more of a barrier to at least
Right. Well,
to
this
mellowing down?
the difference here is like, okay, like, is that fermentation actually oxidization? Is the oxidization needs like air exposure, right? And so if you're pressing it, you're creating pockets without air exposure that will create this oxidization phase to be slower. But at the same time, if we're not worried about oxidization, we're actually worried about fermentation, you can have anaerobic
Sure,
fermentation.
that makes sense. And in Anhua, where we just came back from a couple months ago, everyone was telling us, oh, you have to get looser press stuff. The looser the press, better it's going to age. And for them, aging has to be oxidization, right? They want
Yeah.
that mellowness. That's we're talking about mellowness. Talking about if we want to think about that as oxidization, despite it being a fermented tea. The fermentation is happening when it's piled, right? But as it mellows out, that has to be the process of oxidization, then, right? As it gets lighter and lighter, more and more mellow. I think, yeah, I'm not sure if the color actually changes to become darker and darker, but yeah, I'm curious. Anyways, he's still curious. We're
I'm curious too.
trials, Dre's still out there, but both of them, both in its caked coin version and in its loose version, as Derek says, was kind of astringent, wasn't super good. He also had some stuff he made from the year prior, more to what Lao Rao was talking about, done in a wok.
That was beautiful, yeah.
Beautiful, expensive.
Really
Probably,
expensive.
if you know, apparently only one of you have tried it outside of the sampler. It probably is the closest thing to what like Rao is like reminiscing about, right? Done by Huifeng Factory, done by Li. And
Yeah,
then
we've sold one unit of it.
we've sold one apparently.
50-gram unit.
Yeah, so I guess you guys, much more of you guys like the Huangda Cha or the
Though to be fair,
2023.
we have sold a lot of the samplers, and so
Yes,
what
most
what
you've
is
tried
what
it.
is in the sampler?
So in the sampler, I think as we ascend here, so it'd be Rouse. It should be the 2018 in quotation mark stuff we got from the wholesale market
In Luan.
in Luan, which should be put 20%. Then there is the stuff made in
Mr.
2022 from Huifeng, from Li, right? Then there is the 2023 stuff he had made, which he places in between Huangda Cha and then the
35%.
I think 35% was like how he estimated. Yeah, 15% up and down, right? A lot.
Yeah.
I can tell me how he came to that number, right? 15% below, 50%, which is where he would place maybe like the Huangda Cha or his stuff from 2021. So we have the 2021 two samples and the Huangda Cha, I think from Manfu,
Oh,
from
yeah,
the
yeah.
original contact from
Which again, I
Dylan.
really like that Huang Da Cha.
Yeah, it's pretty good, and we just saw a lot of it like a couple days ago.
Sorry.
So, and,
And
whoever that is, I'm
fight
very
with the boss.
yeah, we're trying to. I guess logically, no, because that's right. Because Lee doesn't want to do Hong Cha anymore, right? So
Yeah.
we need to figure out. Manfu
we'll
needs to give
we'll
us.
talk to Manfu again.
We'll
I mean,
figure this out.
yeah.
But yeah. So let's get to the summit here. The summit of Golden Chicken Mountain.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So Mr. Lee takes us up to the summit of Golden Chicken Mountain, which there is actually a giant golden chicken on this mountain. I imagine that's probably wasn't there when it got its name.
Sure.
It's probably something that came after the fact. It's not like they found a golden chicken on the mountain and named the mountain after it. But what we did see is beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you for letting us know.
We did see beautiful manicured tea gardens, and we saw like the yellow fly paper on the stuff, which means they're trying not to use pesticides. They're using natural pesticides,
Yeah.
Catch the flies.
Lots of good practice. They had tarps down there.
organics, and
Yeah,
stuff like
so-
that. I got some good drone shots of it.
They need to finish the bathroom. Do you remember the bathroom?
Oh no, I did not
So-
venture in there.
It's kind of like imagine like you gone into a forbidden space, like it's like a carnival ground with carnivals not in town or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And they just never
dark.
installed the water, I guess, or maybe they had at one point, but that didn't like stop all the people who have gone to work on the fields from using that bathroom. So it's just an accumulation of filth after we were already at the end of April, right? So
Yeah.
people who had gone out there to tend the fields
End of
for weeks
season.
and weeks.
Yeah.
It was just a pile. And I remember I walked in and I walked right back out. I was just like, okay. So what I guess I took that as a token of is like it's not quite done yet. Definitely not quite finished, right? It's still under repair.
Do we know if Mr. Lee's tea came from Golden Chicken Mountain?
We do. And so there's an interesting connection there. He told us when we were back down the mountain, right? We're eating lunch with him, right? And I was like, where can we get some of this tea from the mountain? So it was the township of Daohuaping spent money in the village up there to say, all right, everyone on top of that scenic spot, top of the mountain, all you villagers, this land's going back to the village and it's going to be run by the collective.
Oh.
And immediately they were like, okay, actually we're going to have to give this to some companies to help run the cultivation aspect of it. And 20 of that mu, I think, went to him.
Oh,
So he's
okay.
one of them who got the land from the village collective. I think for free even, as
Right,
long as he
yeah.
just maintains it well.
That's cool.
And that first year they tried to make their own yellow tea, and
it was apparently, according to Lee, not going great, such that for the next year, they said, okay, for our collectively made tea, actually, it's going to be done in his factory. So
Wow.
he was, I guess for this year, he should have taken over, right? So theoretically, right now even, there is
He's
yellow.
probably making yellow tea. Yeah.
Yeah, you made yellow tea in
We should reach
the
out to him,
collective's name.
yeah.
And yeah, maybe if you're listening and you want some, collective
2024.
stamped, 2034 yellow tea, we can help you get some. But yeah, and that's kind of where we left it. Huashan, it's distinguished itself in a couple ways, I guess. Like after I left and was like trying to look online for how are other people in China like coming to recognize this place. One thing I kept saying consistently was
Concentric circles.
concentric circles. No, but in China, on the Chinese side, they've really gone out on a limb to be like, we're going to be organic,
Oh.
right? I think after Fuding and then Hafeng, that was all places we've been, the third place in China that said we want completely organic tea as a goal.
Yeah. It's a good trend.
Not as a realized thing, but yeah, they're moving in a positive direction. And I think the township collective is going to, and then the village underneath, they're going to figure out what to do with it. They built the golden chicken. They have these wonderfully manicured fields. There's good practices. And
Now they just need to make yellow tea.
yeah, and I think Lee's the man for the job to a certain extent, right? He really is genuinely excited about what he's doing. I think he has the passion for it, and I think he has the resources too from the government. So hopefully, in the years to come, we will see fantastic yellow tea from Mr. Lee and Huashan. And what's already out there is certainly worth your time.
Well, that's for me. Like, this is a very good story because it's like it had a lot of hopelessness in it.
Sure.
It had some good characters, Lao Rao, and then it's like Mr. Lee on the mountain, who's like, we call him Mr. Lee because he's just a guy trying to figure out this yellow tea. Like, he's not like
Not a boss,
not
really.
a boss.
Not really well, I guess he's a maker, right?
He is a
Making
maker.
it. He's a
Right?
producer.
He's doing something no one else is doing. He's
Sure.
interested in it. But anyways, like, we totally like lost all hope and had several dead ends to this, and like went to the actual source of Huashan, where people were like, oh, Huashan is one of the core regions for making yellow tea, and we get there and no one's making it, like nothing at all. We get out to actual like Golden Chicken Mountain, and everyone in the village is like, yeah, like this is the guy, Mr. Lee's doing it. And so it's just like a really cool story of like trying to find it and eventually persisting in our folly and finding it.
And you and your folly have tried it, so thank you.
All right, cool. Any closing remarks, Alex?
If you want more yellow tea, it's time to mobilize the masses, mobilize your friends. Get out there, send us your messages, buy more yellow tea, and we'll do our best to get out there next year and check in with Lee and Rao and the rest of the gang.
All right, cool, guys. Thank you for listening to this episode of Tea Soup, all about yellow tea. Hopefully, we'll be making some yellow tea ourselves in the future at Hafeng and experimenting it more, maybe working more closely with Lee and seeing all this process. So, all right, guys, until the next time, he's Derek from One Over Tea.